think childhood now is a lot more stressful. Before the mobile phones, if bullying was happening, it happened 9 till 3, 9 till 3:30. Now it's 24 hours a day. I've come on my own journey as a parent. My 17-year-old was given a phone at 13. My son, I went a step further. He had a phone from 14, a smartphone, but it's very heavily regulated through Family Link. So it turns off at 8 o'clock at night. It turns on at 7 in the morning. He's got app limits and app banning, because I just feel that I want him to have a childhood. I don't want, TikTok algorithms target boys and girls very differently. With boys, they nudge them towards violent and sexual content, and with girls, they nudge them towards makeup and dieting content. And this is a known thing. And I want to protect my own children from that. Smartphones allow the worst people in the world into your child's bedroom. It is for parents now we have to sometimes be the baddies. We have to say, no, you can't have a McDonald's. You need to have some fruit. We need to be that person. And, as I say to kids, I say, screens are anything that's free means that you are the payment.
Welcome to the 51%, the podcast where we cut through the noise and get back to basics when it comes to women's health. Through expert insights and powerful personal stories, we help you tune into what really matters: your body, your well-being, your life. No one-size-fits-all advice, just real conversations to help you understand your health on your terms. But before we dive in, I've got a quick favour to ask. Please hit subscribe and join the 51% community on our website. It's free and helps us grow, reach more women, and create events that really speak to the health and wealth challenges we all face. And finally, just so you know, everything shared is for information only. It's not medical or financial advice, and always speak to a qualified expert for support that's right for you. Nicola, thank you for joining me today. It's great to have you on. Please, could you share your journey from what you were doing before to what you're doing now? That would be great. Thank you so much.
Hi, thank you for having me. I was a teacher, and I still am a teacher for many years. I trained in 1997 to 1998, and I worked in a number of different types of schools. But in 2002, I started teaching in London, in Islington, and I taught in an area that was very much affected by child criminal exploitation and drugs gangs. And I actually lost quite a few children to this, either through prison or through murder. And my big, I suppose, moment of change was when a student died of mine, was murdered of mine, in 2016. And he was called Mahad Ali, and he was a lovely boy. And I first met him on a secondment in a local secondary school. And I got to know his mum and his brothers there, perhaps a bit more closely than teachers normally do, because secondary school teachers rarely meet the parents and the families. But in primary school, I was meeting them twice a day. And I think that really hit me, because I'd seen this boy from when he was 9-10 years old grow up, and he was stabbed very near his home just after his 18th birthday. And I think that was my turning point. And I thought I wanted to do something, because the newspapers and the television ignored his story. He wasn't in a gang. He wasn't violent. He wasn't carrying a knife. And he was walking through an area where there was a gang that felt that he didn't belong there, and he was attacked. And I would have been safe going through there, but as a young man, he wasn't. And it just felt that people didn't care. And I thought, well, these lovely kids that I teach in London, people are making assumptions about them, and based on where they're living and ethnicity and religion and all these sorts of things. I thought it was so unfair. So I wanted to write a novel that would show my kind of inside information on how young people are growing up in Islington and the difficulties that they go through. And I wanted to really sort of champion them and show their positive side and show what great friends they are and how optimistic they are and what resilience they have. And actually live very difficult lives, but still really try their best. So I wanted to sort of set the balance really for London kids, particularly London kids from backgrounds that are marginalised and misrepresented.
That's fantastic. I mean, I feel like what you're saying about being kind of misrepresented through the media and things like that, and people making assumptions about the lives of these children and who they are, and then the assumptions start on the parents, and then the kind of finger pointing on, oh, they are like this, that group of people, that ethnic minority, or boys, whatever that is, that it's they get grouped and picked on. Now, I know you've worked with a lot of teenagers in your time, in a wide variety of settings. What drew you to working with teenagers in the first instance?
I think I'm a really strange adult, actually, in that I really enjoy spending time with teenagers. And, they make me laugh. They're misunderstood, really. I think it's a fascinating and difficult time between childhood and adulthood, and children are in this sort of limbo at the moment. And I just think they're wonderful people, and I've always really enjoyed teaching teenagers. And I've always been told by wiser teachers than me to leave your pride at the door. And actually, sometimes teenagers are rude, but they've got this massive fluctuations in hormones. They're going through a sort of second toddlerhood. They're growing, rapidly. It's exhausting. They really are going through that, but they're also capable of sophisticated thinking and dreams and wanting to change the world and build a future for themselves. So I think it's a really wonderful time of promise and opportunity. And I really, I mean, my own grandparents left school when they were 13 and started working. They were definitely treated like they were treated as adults from 13. They were paying rent to their parents and contributing, and felt very grown up. We definitely have children, we don't necessarily quite realise how much children can do in mid-adolescence as well. We often try to keep them a bit younger, which is not a bad thing, but we also need to be aware of how much they actually can do.
Yeah. I guess you're really seeing the teenage experience through a lens of big compassion there, really, because a lot of people, I mean, I'm a parent of teenagers just like yourself, and at times you just kind of screaming, your head is about to explode. Deep breaths, and sometimes I can't even hold those deep breaths, and I'm like, rah, just kind of like, and which is normal as well, but your love for teaching and spending a lot of time with teenagers is definitely, I can see through, you see them through a different light. And that is takes a lot of compassion and emotional intelligence, really, to kind of see it in that way, because there are a lot of teachers that will judge and won't see it through that lens and will, do things in a different way and treat children in a very different way to perhaps what you have. Now, you started teaching in 1998, correct me if I'm wrong.
Right.
So how would you describe the teenage experience today compared to kind of 1998? And I know that a lot of things have changed between now and then, so could you kind of explore that with me?
Yeah, well, a lot of things have changed, and one is there's absolute huge numbers of poverty. And I know not just from my own teaching, but from being an author visiting schools. When I visit schools, that I'm seeing more and more children who are looking unkempt, hair not washed, problems with their uniform, and who haven't eaten or haven't had breakfast. And I think that with children, I can see a lot more poverty around the country. That is very depressing, because like my own children, I make sure that they I'm shouting at them for having too long showers, but there are children who don't have hot water, so they're not going to have a shower. In reality, I've had sixth formers who left school because their parents couldn't afford for them not to work. And, at 17, and they've actually, it's been electricity bill and rent or, sixth form. So they needed them to contribute. So that this is a reality. I think childhood now is a lot more stressful. I really think that children, like before the mobile phones, if bullying was happening, it happened 9 till 3, 9 till 3:30. Now it's 24 hours a day. It's the connectivity, it's hyper connectivity. So children, they get no break from each other. And even when they're best of friends, this is causing stress and depression. And children are taking, and teenagers are taking offence if somebody, if somebody comes offline, they feel that it's sort of a personal slight. So there's an immense pressure there. And companies like Snapchat are quids in, really. They're profiting from our natural desire to connect with other people and be part of a community. And they're exploiting this, and they're exploiting children's and young people's need to look good for their peers. A hugely stressful experience. So, yeah.
So do you think, if we go into the kind of topic of social media, do you think that's the main driver? I know you mentioned poverty as well, but I do see children perhaps that are in poverty, and I know there are different levels of poverty, but a lot of children have smartphones now. And do you think that's one of the biggest drivers with issues that teenagers are facing at the moment and what are those main issues that you think they're facing?
Well, I've come on my own journey as a parent. My 17-year-old was given a phone at 13, a smartphone at 13, and before then she had an old brick, and just so she could make a call if she needed to. My son, I went a step further. He had a phone from 14, a smartphone, but it's very heavily regulated through Family Link. So it turns off at 8 o'clock at night. It turns on at 7 in the morning. He's got app limits and app banning because I just feel that I want him to have a childhood. I don't want, TikTok algorithms target boys and girls very differently. With boys, they nudge them towards violence and sexual content. And with girls, they nudge them towards makeup and dieting content. And this is a known thing. And I want to protect my own children from that. And now my youngest, my 12-year-old, is actually, she's happy that I've decided that really, and a group of parents at her school, her friendship group, we've decided that we're going to wait until after the GCSE exams to give a smartphone. So they're going to have to live without one. They can use WhatsApp on the parents' phones. And so they're not completely, they are allowed to stay in their friendship groups, but they're just going to have to wait because it's actually, smartphones allow the worst people in the world into your child's bedroom.
Yeah.
And it's a real, yes, of course, they have to learn to deal with technology and learn to deal with safely with social media. But one of the issues is girls at the moment are putting on full makeup the minute they wake up so that they can take a snap of themselves, which goes broadcast to a large friendship group that's far larger than people they've actually met in real life. And then throughout the day, they take snaps of themselves, and they're followed on Snap maps, and that's sort of giving rise to sort of stalker-like behaviour, particularly from boyfriends who track their girlfriends on Snap maps. And if they come offline, if they take themselves off the visibility on a Snap map, the boyfriends will be accusing them of infidelity or hiding something, and it's becoming a surveillance tool for misogyny. And I really feel like the government is not. They are in Australia. They've got very strict rules now on the age that young people can use social media, which is from 16 now. But I think parents have to step up now because our government is, and there's a profit motive involved. These companies are making they're not necessarily paying a lot of tax, but they are definitely making a lot of money out of our children. And I would say that, it's bigger than us because these companies are employing the most brilliant minds in the world, the most fantastic, people, most intelligent people, to find ways of making things addictive for young people and for us as well. And we need to say no, not our children. Sorry.
Yeah, absolutely. That I watched some time back, and I got my girls who are my older two, they're teenagers now, to watch this program on Netflix, and I can't remember exactly what it's called. It was to do with like social networks or social experiment or something. I can't remember, but it was about social media and how it's affecting people and especially children. And a lot of the ex-workers came on and said that we don't let our children use this.
I was in a meeting with an Apple executive. It was a publishing meeting, and she said that none of the other Apple executives allow their children to have smartphones.
Yeah. Now, see,
yeah.
Exactly. And this is I hear this a lot. I haven't spoken to executives like you may have, but this program did have executives in there and it did mention that. And, now I feel like the pressure is on parents, and there is a lot of pressure and stress on parents now to try and, almost negotiate with their children so that they're not on social media or don't get their smartphones until a lot later. And a lot of parents cave in and give in, and whether it's because they're working and they haven't got the time, or they're stressed already, and there could be lots of things going on there, and it almost feels like you need a community of parents or a group of parents that are strong in their values and think, right, together we're going to say no.
Yes.
Because if one parent says no and 50 others say yes, then that whole pressure is on you, because your child is instantly going to come to you and say, well, everyone else can have it. Why can't I?
Why can't I? Yes, you have to watch that as well. There are more parents doing this than you'd think. And actually, there's an organisation called Smartphone Free Childhood that you can sign up to for support and find other parents in the area as well. And I think it is, it is for parents now to be. We have to sometimes be the baddies. We have to say, no, you can't have a McDonald's. You need to have some fruit. We need to be that person. And as I say to kids, I say, screens are anything that's free means that you are the payment. If something's free on a computer, on a phone, in that, you are the payment.
Yeah, I never thought of it that way, actually. That's a great way of putting it. I think, it's a hard one. It really is. It's there's pressure on the parents and there's pressure on the schools. I know a lot of schools are now starting to implement a no phone policy. And they can only, I know certainly the schools my children go to, they're not allowed to take smartphones in at all, only the old kind of brick phones. And it actually relieves a lot of pressure from me. And I think all schools should be doing that, like nationwide throughout the whole of the UK. There should be a no smartphone policy, because why does a child need to bring a smartphone into a school?
I know a school that has all its exchanges and trips and school visits are smartphone free, and the children report that they enjoy them more and that they really play and talk to each other. So they just say no smartphones, you leave them behind, and the children actually enjoy it. They actually have a bit of a taste of what our childhood was like.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So I want to talk a bit about the documentary Adolescence, which is on Netflix. I know you've watched that, and I have as well. What were your initial reactions to it, and how do you think stories and themes explored in that translate to the reality of young people today?
Well, I did watch it. I thought it was very hard hitting. It felt very authentic to me. It felt very authentic about the sort of position of a boy who in the home is quite lovely and then outside can be. And I teach in the referral programme for the Violence Reduction Unit project, London Mayor. I teach boys who have been and are being very violent, and they've been excluded from school. They have, committed really, really quite frightening, some of them quite frightening attacks on other students or teachers. And yet in the home with their mum, with their cats, with their dogs, with their baby sisters or their nieces and nephews, they are lovely, lovely boys. And it's that, I think one of the problems with children who commit crimes or teenagers who commit crimes is that we have to, in some ways, reconcile their innocence with what they've done and that who they are as a child. And I think one of the problems is that we sort of want to see people as all bad or all good. And one of my methods that I use in my teaching is as attachment theory. So I feel that young people can't study at school. They can't. We are humans. It's a community. It should feel like a family. And that unless they attach to their families and their peers, they are not going to learn. And so that comes first before academic work. The attachment has to come first. So I spend a lot of time in my lessons with doing things that are practical, that are fun, that are discussion based and game based, and try to sort of form those bonds first. We go ice skating, play basketball. They teach me how to do tricks with the basketball, and I fail. And these sorts of things. And actually, they need to be given opportunities to be caught in the act of being good and kind. And they are there. Even boys who've committed terrible crimes, usually because of fear and anger, which anger is a secondary emotion that displaces something else, usually sadness and frustrations, and actually giving them a chance to be good and to catch them in the act of being good and then praise them. You can turn around. My program, my positive alternative early intervention program, has proven that, and it's been evaluated by Dr. James Alexander, who did a study on our program and found that they didn't reoffend after they'd gone through the time with the program, having all this additional intervention. And it's academic, but it's also emotional intervention and learning to deal with stressful situations. So I know the sort of child in that. And I have taught boys who've gone on to, in the past, taught boys who've gone on to murder. I had a boy who was actually in a singing club, and he had the knife in his bag, and he went on and later murdered somebody that evening, and he was 15. And in certain contexts, he was a lovely child, and he had been brutalised and frightened, and we don't quite realise just how, that we see them as criminals. We've got our age of criminal responsibility as being at 10. In other countries, it's 13. Actually, that 10-year-old to 14, 15 is incredibly easy for a child then to be manipulated and brutalised, and for their brain chemicals to be poisoned. And that's exactly what criminal exploiters do. That drugs gangs, they take children and they give them presence and a sense of belonging and friendship and rewards, and then they also make them very frightened. And a lot of boys I know have been stabbed by their own gang as a way of frightening them into obedience, so much so that they're not frightened of the police or teachers or parents. They're actually, the gang is more scary, and they will obey the gang, and they'll do things that are terrible to even their best friend because they are so frightened and poisoned by what they've been told to do and what they've seen. And I think it's about protecting. We need to parent boys better, but not demonize them. We need to allow them a childhood so they can develop a natural sexuality, as in they need to come to their sexuality uninfluenced by pornography. Not come to it in a way that always came before. a crush on a girl, the shyness, and that's not happening at the moment because of freely available pornography. And even if parents have blockers on pornography, social media channels will let them through, because it's like a filter that is, overrides your settings on your Wi-Fi. So I think that's really important, and I think we have to emphasize with boys the positives of masculinity, and they almost every boy I've ever taught has a very, very instinctive protective feelings towards his mother, towards his sisters, towards his pets, and a kind of a sense of courage, or a sense of courage. And I'm not saying these things are exclusively about boys, but we have to say to them, these are you're special. You've got these superpowers. You can protect, defend, and you can stand up against wrong, and you can, you've got strength, and you can use it in a clever way. And to sort of say, it's not bad to be a man. It's good to be a man. But what kind of man do you want to be? And I think it also boils down to fear. And that's one of the things that social media and that was, there was a great fear of rejection, fear of boys, a feeling of fear of being rejected by girls or being made to look a fool. And that's a really strong driver of misogyny at the moment. That's basically what Andrew Tate and the Andrew Tates of the world are saying, is that, women are out to get you. They're out to cheat you. They only want your money. So you cheat them first. They're going to be unfaithful. They're going to be, and that's all coming in through the phone.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you talk about, like, so for example, with adolescence, the child in adolescence wasn't particularly, like you mentioned, he was a very nice boy at home, and, all the things that you mentioned before. He wasn't part of a gang, as far as I knew, from what I was watching. So now that there's two distinctions there, a child that's in a gang, and is fearful and perhaps carries a knife because he's fearful and the gang is manipulating him, and so on, and then versus a child that isn't in a gang, but has gone down the wrong path, but at home is very pleasant and, like you said, interacts wonderfully with his parents, his siblings, and wider family and friends. What's the difference then, in the sense that the actions are similar? So how, can you explain that, basically?
I think it's similar because it's from the same sort of root. There's this which comes from social media, and it's that hyperconnectivity, that constant being presence, the ability of bullying, of playground bullying, to go into the middle of the night instead of stopping at 3 o'clock. And I think it's actually giving, he needed to have a break from school. He needed the sort of squabbles and arguments to be face to face at school, and the friendship problems there. But instead, there's a world, like I said, the worst people in the world are having access to children, and vulnerable children, with special educational needs, who are already perhaps struggling at school, undiagnosed ADHD and autism, and all of these things are making it harder for children then to find their own natural way through childhood and through adolescence. And so I think it is similar in that, like I said about TikTok, giving boys more violent and more pornographic content, nudging them towards that. The way the algorithm works is, if you hesitate on a video, the algorithm will log an interest. So even if a boy knows that he shouldn't be looking at something, and he will swipe it away, the algorithm will know that he hesitated for long enough to throw other things like that at him. And I think that that's the problem, is there's a brutalization there. There's lots of misogyny available, freely available, violence freely available, lots of glorification of knives and of violence, and a sort of sense of being embattled as well. I think he had that feeling that it was him against the world outside of the home.
Yeah. You mentioned poverty. Now, do you think there is a kind of direct correlation of this kind of behavior linked to poverty, or are there people that
Not at all, no.
Yeah,
it's a stereotype that the child the violent child in a gang comes from a family which is chaotic, and it's just not true. There are plenty of families who are high functioning families. I know a mum who's she's fluent in 4 languages, is professional, and has a child who is now on the civil service fast stream as double first in university, and a younger son who was groomed by a gang. So, an excellent mother, high achieving siblings, and a child who has been manipulated into county lines drug running. And he had some vulnerabilities. He wasn't quite as smart as his siblings, perhaps at school, perhaps he needed a bit more support. And definitely families, particularly in drug hotspots, like where I work in Islington, where people are coming out the tube stations and buying drugs, arriving in cars and then going back to other places. That these places, like children, are very valuable to the gangs, and they have extremely effective recruitment. And of course, a child in poverty sharing a bedroom with lots of siblings or in a homeless shelter is going to be more vulnerable. But there are plenty of children who actually, middle class parents, educated parents, who are also vulnerable. And I suppose my own son, I think, I live in the countryside now, and I think that he would actually be very susceptible actually to the grooming by a drugs gang, because he doesn't, what child does like being told you can't have this until your birthday. And I put the limits on his phone, so he has his apps switch off, and he's not allowed to choose which apps he has to keep him safe. But if we live in an area like in London where there's drug hotspots and lots of gangs recruiting young people, they would say to him, you don't need to listen to your mum. We'll give you a phone. You can have a burner, but you don't listen to your mum. She's treating you like a little child. Come with us, and we'll make sure you get the things she won't give you. And I'm sure that would be far too tempting. And then he would find himself in a position where he was, in modern slavery of working for nothing. There's all this glamorization of children in drugs gangs as if they're making lots of money, but most of the time they're paying off a fake drug debt that's been engineered by the gang to put them into a state of where they owe money to the gang and they work for free then.
Yeah. What do you think the impact of this is on, parents, siblings, and, girls, women, the overall impact? Because, this must have a massive impact on mental health, physical health. There's knock-on effects,
Yes, all of this is in London. It's particularly marked because you've got whole communities that are traumatized. Younger siblings are traumatized by the amount of knife crime. The knife crime is just off the scale in London. The surgeons in London's hospitals are going to train train surgeons in war zones on blunt weapon injuries and how to do surgery on blunt injuries. And it is just incredible how many, like in Islington, it's 5 young people have been murdered since 2013, not 2023, sorry. And it really is, there's whole communities there that know somebody who's been hurt, and they are living. It's very difficult to learn when you're frightened, or you're frightened about your older siblings, or if you feel like you can't go somewhere. And so I think that is a really poisonous for children, that sort of fear that is produced. But outside of perhaps in more peaceful areas where there aren't the drugs hotspots, it's also affecting children. There's also particularly the smartphones are allowing these ideas into children's lives that are causing trauma, whether it's things they're seeing or ideas perhaps about leading to eating disorders, particularly for girls. There are kind of diet tips all over TikTok to help girls starve themselves. It's very serious. And I think, the government recently said that they were going to have a paid counsellor in every school. At the moment, a lot of schools will have one, like Young Minds sends a counsellor in once a month to schools. That means they've got 6 hours for 1,400 children. And we know children all the time are experiencing bereavement and some divorce, some, traumas about things that have happened in their lives, domestic violence. And there's a far more young people would benefit from counselling than there are counsellors available at the moment.
Yeah, I feel like the responsibility lies with everyone, and it's not, and getting, you mentioned that getting counsellors into school, but it's almost kind of, you're just kind of masking.
Yes, it's a sticky tape, isn't it, over the plaster over the problem. Yes,
exactly.
You're right. We need to take action as parents, as schools, and the government needs to take action as well. Not least economically. Without sounding like a conspiracy theorist, something like TikTok that originates from China is actually it's dumbing down the population. There are children who can spend 5 hours a day on it. It's addictive. It's highly addictive, and they're not learning, and then they're not going to contribute to the economy. And actually, they're not allowed to use it in China. They don't want their children having it. It's really is something that is going to give an economic advantage to countries that don't allow it. And so, if nothing else, if not for the sort of personal safety and well-being and mental health of our children, the government needs to act because of the repercussions down the line. Watching screens, literally makes people, less able to learn, and less able to meet their potential and their economic potential, if you want to put it in those kinds of stark terms.
Yeah.
Reductive terms.
In an ideal situation, what do you think the actions should be that create change, rather than kind of putting a plaster on something and masking situations?
I think follow Australia. I think we don't need social media for children under the age of 16. We need to ban it. These companies are not even paying tax. We're not even benefiting from the taxes they pay. So why are we giving them a free pass? I don't understand that. I think we've got to legislate now to protect children's childhoods.
And what role should parents play? Because and schools, because everyone plays a part in this. It's not just down to the government or just on the parents, and it can't be just on the parents, because we're kind of powerless with the big corporations like TikTok and Facebook and so on.
Yeah, I think parents have got to show by example. We're equally addicted. I know I am. During times like Brexit or the election, I'm stuck to the news on my phone. I really am. I've become quite obsessed and addicted. But I'm also mindful that they need to see me reading, and they need to see me doing other things. And I feel quite embarrassed, because actually I'm not always modelling the behaviour that I want them to have. And so I think we need to make sure that we're, reading a book in front of them and to them. I'm a really big believer in reading to your children well beyond the age most parents stop. I mean, into teens, because there's nothing that promotes literacy more than hearing stories aloud and discussing them, and it being a shared, thing. So. Yeah.
What about the situation with the, the communities that are in poverty and, experiencing knife crime, gang-related behaviour and so on? And, like you mentioned, it's not, Islington is a big borough, and when someone hears of Islington, they perhaps do not think poverty.
Oh, they
They
might think
think
Tony Blair and the millionaires' mansions. Yeah,
exactly,
yeah,
and
yeah,
there's areas where people will what's the word, generalize and be, oh, Islington's a very posh, rich, middle class, area, and so are these other areas, and places like the east end of town, and
yeah. Those,
Bethnal Green
those
and
are
things are
customers.
poverty.
Yeah, the customers. I mean, I've just organised a child criminal exploitation conference last week at Finsbury Park Mosque, and we had MPs, police chiefs, social workers, teachers coming together with parents of criminally exploited children, and it was a chance for the parents to talk about their experience and for professionals to listen to what it's actually like to parent a child who's going down that road and how to help better. And it is the case. Okay, yes, there are a lot of heroin addicts, there are a lot of crack addicts, but a vast majority of the groomed children are delivering cocaine to middle class, professional, white recreational drug users. And one of the messages I was on the BBC News being interviewed about this, and one thing I'm very clear about is that if you're taking recreational drugs, you are contributing to child abuse. You're contributing to a child having drugs in their digestive tract, swallowing them, and potentially having a catastrophic overdose if it bursts, if the packages burst. You're contributing to brutalisation, to murders, to sexual abuse as well, because sexual abuse is one of the tools of the gangs, particularly boys having sexual experiences too early and girls being abused in order to provide. Often girls in care are used as a sort of gift to some of the boys, sort of early sexual experiences. It is a whole world out there that I don't think the people who are using cocaine realise. They don't realise that they're in media. They're in. They swabbed the toilets in Westminster, and they found that the politicians and civil servants were using cocaine because there were cocaine traces in the bathrooms in Westminster, past Westminster. So what they don't realise is that they are actively facilitating child abuse by taking cocaine, and they need to understand that. So that's one of the messages that we had, and really, we've got to educate people to see that what they're doing has a real world impact on children in the same city.
How do you think you can get that message out, big, bold, to the masses? Because I feel like that kind of message needs to be on buses and on billboards, and
that's what we wanted. We wanted to get
Saatchi
and Saatchi involved. They did a wonderful ad campaign. We'd love to have some buses with that message. I'm looking into commissioning an animation, which will show the progress of a cocaine through London and where it's been, because it has been plugged in a child, most probably, and that child is suffering enormously for that person's fun. It's completely irresponsible. And these adults who are taking cocaine, these middle class, often white professional people, university educated, they put their recycling out. They buy organic vegetables. They are voting perhaps Green or Lib Dem, and they see themselves as good people. They're often parents, and they see themselves as good people, and they see, the party drug as something for a dinner party or for an event, confidence, or have a good time. They don't see that actually, that's possibly the worst thing that they can do.
Do you really think, though, that putting that message out there to the masses of, the people, the parents, or the individuals that are taking cocaine or other drugs, they are contributing to this, which is correct? And I actually didn't see it in that way, really. I know that obviously I saw it the other way, in the sense that there's people at the top, importing the drugs, and we have to get to them, and that, but I didn't see it on the consumer side. as a contributory factor.
Driving, yes. And oh gosh,
Yeah.
the cocaine business runs into billions in this country. We second highest number of cocaine users
Really?
in the world, yeah, after Australia per capita, yeah. As in the number of in population.
The number of
The
so Australia is the first, and then we are the second.
Yes, apparently, yes.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a huge users. And obviously in America it's different because they're often there's different drugs that are being used in America. It's more the kind of things like Xanax, benzos, those types of drugs are more common in America. And then crystal meth instead of heroin. It's the kind of core addicts drug.
Do you think the message though of kind of putting it out there to people, saying you're contributing, when you buy these drugs, you're contributing to all these bad things that are happening to children, do you think they were actually going to care? I mean, in the sense, I feel like that it's almost a case of, especially really wealthy, like it's a case of, well, we've got the money and we just do it recreationally and, so what kind of thing.
I think people can get behind a campaign. I'll give an example from my childhood with apartheid. My parents, when they learnt about the situation, they stopped buying fruit and vegetables that were from South Africa. And, if they hadn't known, if there hadn't been an awareness campaign about the link between the fruit and vegetables that we imported to the lives of Black people in America, in Africa, then we wouldn't have stopped that. And I think a lot of people did. And I think we can have that here. It needs to be a kind of shameful thing where, if somebody brings it out at a sort of upper middle class dinner party, that someone goes, "Oh, you do that, do you? No, thanks, I don't. I don't want to harm children." And people start to become embarrassed, and then it becomes a secretive activity rather than a social activity. That's where we want it to be. That actually we want it to be a high profile campaign so that people actually feel awkward, and it will be they want to please their peers. They don't want to look, and I think that will go some way to helping. But we do have definitely, particularly in the West, we have spent so long believing in self-actualization and that we are the center of the world, and we teach that our children are the center of the world and the most precious thing in the world. I think we need to move away from that now. We need to actually decenter ourselves and say, well, the world and other people and community are more important than us as individuals. And that extends to having multiple short breaks by plane. I'd love to get to a point in society where people are frightened to say, "Oh, I went to Bilbao for the weekend. I flew to Bilbao for the weekend," and they'll actually be, nervous of saying that to their friends because they won't want their friends to think that they don't care about their children's future, climate, contributing to climate change. And we can nudge people's behaviour like this. I feel that we will get to that point, but we're not there yet with climate change, and we're not there yet really with the drugs.
Yeah, I feel like we're getting further and further away, to be honest, because of the way things are going.
First, and putting yourself first, or learning to put yourself first, is just such a money spinner for companies. You deserve it. You're worth it. Don't worry about the plastic. You deserve this product. You're important. And that's a dangerous but very seductive message for people. And social media really amplifies that you are the most important person on the planet. Your happiness matters more than anyone else.
Yeah, I didn't, that does really create a sense of, it's a great message to put out there, saying in the sense that, I'm worthy, I'm this and I'm that. And to give you that boost of whatever it leads you to. But then I feel like very, very few people, and I hope I'm wrong, really think about the impact of everything they're doing, from buying, where they're buying their clothes from, to, to buying drugs or whatever they're doing.
Children are frightened by climate change. They're frightened by it, but they're also being pushed, huge amounts of things that are driving climate change. It's a really difficult situation. So in primary school classrooms, they're learning about climate change. There's sort of the end of term performances based on what they wish for the world, and then their parents are whisking them away to, on a long haul holiday. There's an incongruence in a lot of their lives. They're really, there's a cognitive dissonance because their parents will be enjoying that assembly on endangered species, and then doing something that's deforestation, then go home to a meal that's creating deforestation. Or, we're definitely, children are going to have some very, very, very challenging circumstances that we're going to leave with them to handle, and things like mass migration because of desertification and war zones, which are all kind of pretty much can be brought back to changes in the climate. Certainly, Syria and is a strong link between climate change and that, and certainly South Sudan. They're going to be dealing with a different world to us. Going back to the phones or social media is saying that the world doesn't matter. What matters is how you look on Instagram or how you look on Snapchat, and this cream, and that that's the most important thing.
It's so hard to you saying that. I feel like now, oh my god, I didn't really think about things to this level, because everyone on day-to-day basis, they're just getting on with their lives, and then on that hamster wheel, whatever they're doing, and they don't really take the time to step back and think about these things and carry on buying whatever they're buying without thinking. And I don't know, I feel like this is just going to keep going on. I don't see big change very soon.
I think the power of the consumer is really strong. I mean, thinking about Gaza and Israel, and thinking, will we get to a point where we'll be looking at the fruit or the tahini that we're buying and thinking, putting that back? I'm not sure we're there yet. I'm not sure people are connecting their buying power with in the way that we did with South Africa in the 80s. But I hope it will come, because we are collectively very powerful.
No, definitely. I hope we get there. I definitely hope we get there at some point. And I'm not going to sit here and say I don't contribute to anything. I absolutely do. I do contribute to probably a lot of things, from things I wear to flying on holidays.
We all do.
Yeah. This is not to say that, me and you are just completely squeaky clean.
No, not at all. No, not at all.
It's just about raising awareness and understand, at least even thinking, planting that seed to get you thinking about, hold on a minute, what am I contributing to, and how can I improve, and how can I help? You're not going to be at stage, go from, 100 to 0 to 100. It's in a day. That's not going to happen. But at least planting that seed and thinking about your next steps is really important as a parent with your, or a carer to whoever, to children with smartphones, whether that's contributing to the drug industry, whatever that might be. We can all have a think about how we're doing things. Now, I know you've written some books.
Yes.
Which is great. And we talked a little bit about your inspiration and why you've written those books. Can you talk a bit about the books and who are the books for? Who's the audience really? Because it's, I want to understand, is it for the teens that might be going through something? Is it for the parents?
Well, I most of my books are crossovers, which means they're suitable for teenagers and from about 13 upwards, and adults as well. So They can be read by a number of different audiences. So my first book is 29 Locks, and that was the book I wrote that's dedicated to Mahad Ali, who was murdered. And it's really about young people and how they're groomed into drugs gangs and brutalised, but how they actually escape it, and the enormous resilience and humour and friendship, and just the wonderful London kids and how amazing they can be. And the sad thing about this book is that everything that happens in it is true, apart from the last scene. Everything has happened to young people I know. Nothing is made up. There are some conversations that are verbatim. There's a scene with a teacher, and that teacher is me, and the teacher makes huge mistakes. I was terrible when I first started because I grew up on Dartmoor. I was never hungry. I was never unsafe. I had my parents weren't wealthy, but we, never had any of the pressures that the children I teach in London have. And so when I first started teaching in London, I couldn't comprehend. And so, why aren't you behaving? Why aren't you doing your homework? And I couldn't actually understand that it was connected with homelessness and poverty and fear and all sorts of other things in the mix. And actually, there are kids that I've taught that I thought, if I went through that, I'd be calling in sick, and yet they're coming every day to school, and they should be given a medal. I had a boy who was homeless, and he came to school from a different part of the borough or from other boroughs every couple of weeks, because his mum and him were homeless, and sometimes they sofa surfed and sometimes they stayed with cousins. And so I used to give him a detention slip every time he came in late. He was in year 7, he was 11 years old. And about halfway through the year, he used to take the detention slips, apologise, and go back, carry on working and go do his normal day at school. About halfway through the year, I realised that what had happened, and I was told that he and his mum were homeless and they had a different address every few weeks. And I realised that he'd been taking different buses through different areas of London, and even if he got late, he got to school. And I thought he should have been given a medal, not a detention slip. And at 11, I couldn't have used the London transport system. No way. No way. I couldn't have done it. And we're punishing kids for actually being quite amazing and managing their lives and parents and and the dangers around them and school incredibly well. So that was my first book. My second book was actually inspired by some experiences that I had volunteering in Calais, and so I did some volunteering for an organisation called Calais Ouverture et Humanité, and it was with teenage refugees in Calais, and these are the young people who are trying to come across on small boats and hiding on the Eurostar and on lorries and frequently die. And so I worked with some teenagers there, and I thought, this is a story I want to tell, because these are people that I would argue any country should be fighting over. They are incredibly resourceful, brave people with a huge an aim. They are entrepreneurial. They have got incredible courage, and they're coming from war zones and droughts and famines. Displaced people, and they're often coming on their own. Their parents give them all the money that they have, to a 15-year-old boy, and say, go. I've taught girls in London whose mums have put them on the plane and said, go, because I don't want you to have female genital mutilation like I had, and I'd rather you were in another country. So go, and given them all their money, and they've met 8 years later. When the parents have managed to come and find them. And I just think these incredible people. I taught a boy in London who was a refugee, and we were doing a walk around Hampstead Heath for World to raise money for polar bears. And at the end of it, we brought them an ice cream, and they'd raised, I think this boy had raised about £100 for polar bears, so he sort of won the sponsorship thing. And I said, that was a long walk. We walked 8 miles because we did quite a long walk. And I said, have you ever walked that far before? And he said, yes, I walked 100 miles when they were killing people in my village.
Wow.
And I thought, okay, you're a 12-year-old boy who's now raising money for polar bears and for the World Wildlife Fund. I mean, that's incredible. So I wanted to capture that kind of spirit of teenage, and how teenage refugees are just like every other teenager. they love football, they love their friends, they're, loyal and hopeful. And I wanted to capture that. So that's my next book. And obviously 21 miles is the distance it takes to get from France to the UK. Not very far, but deadly. And I would highly recommend the same publisher, Hope Road, is on the Booker Prize now with Small Boat by Vincent Delacroix. And it's an amazing book. I highly recommend it to your listeners. And then the third novel, which is unrelated to my London novels, and this is On the Edge, and this is set where I grew up, and it's my most autobiographical novel really yet, because it's got a lot of my family in it, a lot of my brother. And so it's about a surf champ in South Devon who is facing unemployment and actually also on the brink of homelessness. And he is radicalised by a political protest group, which is modelling itself on Mebby and Glendower. Now, Mebby and Glendower was operating in Wales in the 80s and 90s, and they were burning down second homes as a protest, English-owned second homes. So they burnt down about 200 second homes across Wales to try to stop that happening after the poll tax meant that people could own as many houses as they want and not pay council tax. So it became a sort of incentive to buy up properties and not live in them. And so this is set where there's huge numbers of second homes, and it's about the impact on locals. And it's funny, it's very sad. And yes, that's coming out in August this year.
Oh wow, very different book. Yeah, I didn't know that. I'd never knew that about Wales.
Well, interestingly, when I was visiting bookshops in South Wales, talking about the book, I mentioned it, and even young booksellers knew, who were born after 1994, well after 1994, they knew about Mebby and Glendower. They knew, and interestingly, there was a £50,000 reward in the early 80s put up by the British government for information leading to an arrest, and nobody said anything. The Welsh people really backed. They never killed anybody. There was never, it was all arson and criminal damage, and really beautiful cottages were burnt down. They were damaging their own culture, really.
Yeah.
Show just how, because when people own second homes somewhere beautiful, it means that locals can't afford to stay where they were born. It means they can't afford. It means pubs shut and shops shut and schools shut as well, because there aren't people living there permanently. So it has a catastrophic effect on community. So this is set where I grew up in South Devon, beautiful area, and it's got a lot to do with my own childhood.
Lovely. So to end, really, I'd like to kind of ask you, what one piece of advice would you give to each kind of group of people? And that would be, firstly, the government, secondly, the parents, third, the schools. And I also want to add in there, the media in general. I know that's a big, media is huge, like all sorts of things, but I feel like the media contributes to people's views in quite a negative way. What the media puts out there, we listen, watch, absorb, and then we make assumptions about a group of people or about teenagers living in poverty and, etc. So what would you like to say? What piece of advice would you give to each of these groups of people, to make the world better, right? Basically.
Well, I'd say we need to allow children to have a childhood. We need to regulate social media apps and smartphones. We need to make sure that children have the space to develop their sexuality in a natural way, so that they come to sexual attraction, whether it's same sex or the opposite sex, that doesn't matter. The point is that they arrive at that naturally, and not as a vehicle for a company to make profit. And I would say that we need to, parent together, make sure that we're making connections with other parents right through our children's adolescence, so that we can parent together and not as individuals. And I would say to the media is, let's start sharing some good news stories about teenagers, and particularly boys, because We need to counteract some of the negative stereotyping, because for every one child like the boy in adolescence, there are, amazing boys doing, working hard and striving for things to be better. And we need to amplify their voices and celebrate our children and our children's achievements. I just thought about your questions, and in the book, I don't have the book because it's being printed actually next week. So I don't have the book. I've got a manuscript. The three boys in the book, they've lost their mum early on in their lives, and so there's this sort of absence of the mother throughout the novel, which is difficult for them. And the oldest really suffers the most. So the youngest doesn't really notice his mum not being there because he's never really known her. But the eldest, it's a very, very sore and defining part of his life. So I've just got a little bit about Reese, the eldest. So he's 17. Reese has studied mums in the park to see what his would have been like. Some frown like skippers negotiating paddleboarders in the harbour when their sprogs do basic stuff for the first time. Others take pictures on their phones to keep for another day so they can compare, like Phil Fisher does. Little Reese in his baggy nappy against big Reese on his Kawasaki. He's seen a mum sprint to her kid and get there in time like Spider-Man before he falls from atop the monkey bars. Not all mums are like that. Some see their little one trip or slip and they look tired and carry on chatting or say, "Get those shoes dirty and I'll..." At school parents' evenings, Reese watches mums and thinks his would have been more of the Spider-Man ilk, shooting a sticky web from her palm to scoop him away from the forces amassing against him, in particular, the numbers and letters that dance. "See that grade 1, she would have surely said. "It's only a scribble from a 9. Here, get me a pen." That's his idea. And it's the only Fisher, except for his dad, who can remember what she was like. He's probably correct. Dad was little and Owen was inside her for their time together. 9 months cuddled close, fed, swimming day and night. What a holiday. One snowy winter, they were riding bin bags down the Tor and running back up again like howling wolves, their T-shirts steaming. Phil Fisher lay in the snow and Reese and Dad fell in next to him, breaking the crust, not so cold as you might think, at least not for Owen, on their dad's chest, always hot, arms enough to beat the wind, his prickly neck smelling of brute. Owen asked, "What was she like?" "Your mum," said Phil Fisher. What a stupid thing to ask, thought Reese. You see her in photos every day. She was very pretty. "Yes," said Dad, leaning close. "What was she like?" "Well," says Phil Fisher, "she would have hated this for a start." "Why, Dad?" "Gorse here, ditch there, granite scarp, sheep shit. Full teasers." "Shut up and listen, Squirt," said Dad. "She would have called us in and chewed my ears off for putting you in peril. She'd have a bale of cotton wool from the old folks' home ready to wrap you up in, my boys." Reese imagined their mum's fingers, cold from snowballs, warmed sausage hot in Phil Fisher's hand. If she'd been there to put Owen's socks on his feet, he would not moan. "Right then," says Phil Fisher, "at least put your coats on, lads. It's what she would have wanted." So they did. It was very sweaty, but they did so all the same, because it made them closer to what she was like.
Thank you. Thanks for that. And when is that book out?
It's out on the 14th of August.
Okay.
And it's available. Pre-order now from Old Barn Books.
Perfect. Thank you. All the details of your books are going to be in the show notes. So if anyone listening would like to have a look, go ahead and click on the links and it will direct you to all the links for the books. Nicola, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to have you on.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.